The events that led up to the bombings on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki show how Japan was a threat and needed to be stopped to avoid a major war. Thus, these bombings were necessary and beneficial for the whole world because it helped greatly towards the end of the Second World War. Beginning in 1871, Japan began to exert more influence in Korea, forcing previous Chinese influence to be replaced. Japan captured and claimed Korea land as their own. In 1894, Japan went to war against China for possession of Korea and won. Fast forward to during the First World War. Japan and the United States fought as allies, or the side known as Allied powers. They fought alongside France and Great Britain, these being the Central Powers along with the several other allied nations against the Axis. Japan, while enemy European countries were distracted, had slowly piece by piece taken over German claims in China and the Pacific. In 1910, Japan invaded even more land in Korea to be able to deploy troops onto the mainland. However, France, Netherlands, and the United States were afraid Japan would soon be able to take over Asia and wanted to prevent this from happening. They tried advising Japan against continuing to take over land, but they continued invading the German claims in other nations along Eastern Asia until 1919. This is when they focused on China. This led to Japan owning a range of colonies around the peripheral of China. At the end of World War I, the League of Nations, an intergovernmental organization whose primary goal was to prevent wars and maintaining peace, was established. It consisted of the United States, Soviet Union, Japan, Italy, Spain, and other countries. In September 1927, Japan's troubles against China began. The Chinese government announced that they would not respect any agreement that they were not part of. This forced the Manchurian warlord Chang So-lin to deny Japan's request to build 5 more railroads in the North China. His later assassination ended in any chance Japan had of peacefully creating an independent Manchuria under Japanese control. Then, on September 19, 1931, everything changed. Manchuria, a city in northeast China, rich in resources and a crucial trading location for multiple big nations. The capture of the city would be highly beneficial due to being connected to the mainland and much safer area, compared to Japan's dense populations and earthquake-rich mountains terrain island surrounded by water. So naturally, Japan attacks Manchuria. Japan's attack was successful. However, before attacking, they had not declared war. This was against the rules of League of Nations, who had also been strongly objecting of Japan's moves. Since Manchuria was also a very popular trading destination, multiple nations were angry with Japan and tried convincing Japan to stop invading China. Japan, however, continued fighting in China and captured all of Manchuria and most of coastal China until 1939. Back to 1937. In December, the Japanese Air Forces received information that fleeing Chinese forces were in the area. The Air Force quickly bombed the ship, destroying it. But later on, Japan found out the ship wasn't a Chinese ship, but rather a U.S. ship in Chinese water. Japan apologized to the U.S. and claimed that they didn't see any American flags on the ship. But according to United States Lieutenant J.W. Geist, 3 American flags were plainly visible on the ship. Even if the attack was accidental, this is when the United States of America changed their perception of Japan. As a result, in 1940, the United States cut off shipments of gasoline and other products from Japan. Japan reacted to this by forging an alliance with Germany and Italy. This was known as the Tripartite Pact, which worsened Japan's relations with the U.S. Then, in July 1941, the United States, along with Australia, Britain, and the Dutch, boycotted Japan via trade embargo. These nations provided 90% of all resources to Japan and were all seized from trade. This was especially the time they really needed these resources to fuel airplanes and warships. This left Japan with 2 options: either fight the US or withdraw from China to get the oil. To help China, the US set up an aggressive Chinese Air Force that was nicknamed Flying Tigers, that would not only defend China against Japanese air power, but also start bombing Japanese islands which threatened Japan. Now, Japan realized their urgent need for oil. Japanese admirals hoped that a knockout blow destroying the American fleet at Pearl Harbor would bring US down enough to negotiate about their oil situation. Before they did anything, Japanese diplomats were sent to Washington to negotiate. However, Japan's desire to conquer China and US's commitment to defend China resulted in no compromise to be made. Hideki Tojo, a general from the Japanese army and the new Prime Minister of Japan, was bent on war. the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service conducted a surprise military attack against the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor. They attacked with fighters, level and dive bombers, and torpedo bombers, which were launched from 6 aircraft carriers. All 8 of the United States battleships present were damaged, with 4 of them sinking. They also damaged 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and an anti-aircraft training ship, and 1 mine layer. 188 U.S. aircrafts were destroyed, and 2,403 Americans were killed, along with 1,178 Americans wounded. On the other hand, Japan's losses were minuscule compared to the U.S.'s 29 aircrafts, 5 midget submarines, and only 64 deaths. The surprise attack came as a shock to the American people and led U.S. to their entry into World War II. The following day, on December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan.
Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us.
This marked the beginning of the Pacific War, a conflict between Japan and the United States of America that ended on September 2, 1945. After a series of battles over the next 4 years against the United States and the rest of the Allied forces, Japan was forced to surrender. On August 6, 1945, the current president, Harry S. Truman, in order to make Japan surrender, decided to drop an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima called Little Boy. 70,000 to 80,000 were killed by the bomb, and 20,000 were injured.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East, and we have won. But the greatest marvel is not the size of the enterprise, its secrecy, or its cost, but the achievement of scientific brains in making it work.
However, Japan stood their ground and didn't surrender even after such a devastating loss. As a result, 3 days later, on August 1945, the United States dropped yet another atomic bomb on the city of Nagasaki called Fat Man. 35,000 to 40,000 were killed and 60,000 were injured. Finally, on August 15, 1945, Japan announced their surrender of World War II and was formally signed on September 2, 1945. This marked the end of World War II because other nations were afraid they might end up the same way as Japan. Japan was under control of the Allied powers controlled by America, who placed rules on Japan. Finally, on September 8, 1951, a treaty, which was more like a compromise, called the Treaty of San Francisco, was signed by 48 nations to give Japan freedom but had to give up lands they had captured. On the other hand, the US had to give up Japan. Bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki was beneficial to the whole world because if US hadn't bombed Japan, there would have been countless number of casualties, and the war would have gone on for a much longer time than it was, or it could possibly be still active right now.